You low-life scum.
John Timoney and the Miami Model. Now that sounds pretty benign, like the name of a cross-cultural Irish crime drama complete with a stereotypically sexy woman wearing a thong bikini. But no, it is far more sinister than that. John Timoney has an interesting history. Born in Dublin, he moved to New York when he was 13 and eventually became a police officer with the NYPD, where he did quite well. In 1988, as deputy commissioner, he helped to lead the police response to the Tompkins Square Park protests, which ended in more than 100 official complaints of police violence. Not just to protesters, mind you, but to innocent bystanders and press as well. Thus began a lucrative career marked by his quote-unquote ability to deal with large crowds of protesters. In 1998, he moved to the Philadelphia Police Department to work as police commissioner, presiding over the police tactics and actions in the 2000 Republican National Convention that witnessed the now well-known tactic of infiltrating and spying on activist groups, raiding workshop space, and detaining activists who were making signs and puppets for more than 2 hours with no warrant, and of course, the violent arrest of more than 400 people. Timoney then made a brief foray into the private sector, like you do, before heading down to Miami for a cool $8 million in order to outline police tactics for the upcoming free trade area of the Americas Summit in 2003. What followed has been dubbed the start of paramilitary policing in the U.S., and as one writer from the St. Petersburg Times wrote, "The show of force would have made a Latin American dictator blush." Journalist and filmmaker Jeremy Scahill was also there as a reporter with Democracy Now! And describes the scene like this. The forces fired indiscriminately into crowds of unarmed protesters. Scores of people were hit with skin-piercing rubber bullets. Thousands were gassed with an array of chemicals. On several occasions, police fired loud concussion grenades into the crowds. Police shocked people with electric tasers. Demonstrators were shot in the back as they retreated. One young guy's apparent crime was holding his fingers in a peace sign in front of the troops. And they shot him multiple times, including once in the stomach at point-blank range. It was clear from the jump that Timoney's men came prepared to crack heads, and they did that over and over. Scahill goes on to describe how his colleague, Anna Nogueira, who was wearing press credentials in plain sight, was not only violently arrested, but forced to strip in jail in front of male officers and held in jail until 3:30 in the morning, only after Scahill posted her $500 bail, even after continued calls from both Democracy Now! And the ACLU. Finally, in Scahill's report, a chilling and telling sign of things to come. Miami Mayor Manny Diaz called the police actions last week a model for Homeland Security. FTAA officials called it extraordinary. Several cities sent law enforcement observers to the protests to study what some are now referring to as the Miami model. And if you were ever part of an Occupy encampment, you might recognize these tactics, whether that be the embedding and inciting violence or just plain and simple violence. Charging peaceful protesters, beating them, unlawful search and seizure, unlawful arrest, detainment, so on and so forth. Or, if you happen to hear about Bahrain, yes, Bahrain, part of the Arab Spring uprising in 2011 where pro-democracy activists rose up against not only their own corrupt government, but the support forces brought in from both Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, who worried that any successful uprising in Bahrain would spread. In response to their demands for justice and equality, protesters were met with everything from tear gas to torture as they assembled around Pearl Square in the capital, Manama. Ali Al-Dari, a Bahraini journalist and activist who was there at the time, describes the scene of a beautiful uprising. Sunni and Shia praying together, activists putting roses in the barrels of military guns, sliced by the extreme violence of security forces. Human rights groups reported multiple deaths due to the use of tear gas alone. American-made, by the way, one of old Timoney's favorite tools in his less-than-lethal arsenal. Don't let people tell you that our manufacturing sector is dead. So, this is all horrible, but why am I bringing it up? So this jackass went to Bahrain and took his methods with him. It's not like we're new to the idea of barging into countries, killing random people, and calling it consulting or democracy. So why bring up John Timoney and the Miami model today? Well, aside from the fact that our police forces have militarized faster than a right-winger confronted with facts, it is important to know that these tactics are homegrown. This increase in the use of so-called less-than-lethal weapons like tear gas, rubber bullets, and sound cannons, and an ever-growing rift between police brutality and systemic accountability are homemade. They're not some Middle East, South American, or Asian problem that somehow found its way into the cozy confines of our democracy. That shit was made here and exported. Like Naomi Klein outlines in her book, The Shock Doctrine, we've been trying these shock, awe, and payout schemes around the world since the 1950s. And after 9/11, the climate was just about right to bring them home. And just like with 9/11, the publicized reasons always tout national security, freedom, and our way of life. Timoney has on many occasions argued that his tactics simply rest on the tenets of things like keeping the streets clear so that people aren't interrupted and inconvenienced by those pesky protesters. Although, isn't it funny how an all-out riot tends to block more traffic than a peaceful protest? Yeah, I call bullshit, and so does the rest of the 99%. And that is why I bring this up, so that we not only understand our country's role in global terror, but understand that we, the 99%, are fighting around the world. And just as low-life scum like Timoney seek to spread their psychopathic schemes anywhere and everywhere that'll take them, we have to do the same. Fight here, in your streets, in your towns, but connect with those fighting all over the world because, for fuck's sake, we are all fighting the same damn evil, the same low-life scum. And tactics like this Miami model will not be overturned unless we overturn them. That shock doctrine has banked the oligarchs billions, and they're not going to let go of it just because we took the time to make a protest sign. Find inspiration and willpower in the stories of those who stood up and keep standing up. Find power in your powerlessness, as Václav Havel writes. Fight fascists because they are fascist, not because you think you'll win, as Hedges writes. And for those fellow existentialists out there, mooch some motivation from Ali Alderi's Remembering Pearl Square. For that brief period, we had lived beyond sectarianism. The square was a different way of life. It made you feel, as Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish once said, that there was something worth living for on this earth. I cannot see any meaning beyond the life fashioned by the Arab in his springtime, the life that has turned so many cities in the Arab world into squares of liberation. This is a time that we will always be proud we were a part of. 5 years later, Bahrain is still fighting for life beyond sectarianism, because they know, as so many of us know, that those moments only exist in the ongoing fight against corruption, greed, war, and hate, against low-life scum worldwide.
You low-life scum.
Hopefully that shot of resistance, that dose of dissent, will get some asses in gear. To read more of Ali Alderi's accounts on Bahrain's uprising, and indeed 7 others, check out Diaries of an Unfinished Revolution. Key word there being unfinished. Ask yourself what it would take for you to give of yourself, time, energy, to fight for something better, as opposed to living in a system made for dying. And if you already are, well, fucking A, let's keep going.